Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. China's Ministry of Commerce accused the U.S. of AI hegemonism after American officials raised the possibility of investigations, sanctions, and export restrictions against Chinese firms accused of improperly acquiring advanced AI capabilities. The immediate focus is Beijing-based Moonshot AI and its Kimi K3 model. U.S. officials allege Moonshot used large-scale model distillation techniques to extract capabilities from advanced American AI systems, including Anthropic's Claude model. The concern is not simply that a competitor built a better product. The concern is whether Chinese companies are using access to U.S.-developed systems to rapidly accelerate their own capabilities while bypassing some of the research and development costs that American companies have carried. That is why this debate has moved far beyond Silicon Valley. It now sits squarely in the national security arena. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that companies involved in what Washington considers industrial-scale intellectual property theft could face sanctions or placement on the Commerce Department's entity list, potentially cutting them off from U.S. technology. China strongly rejected those accusations, arguing that Washington is using national security concerns to restrict legitimate competition. Beijing said it would take all necessary measures to defend Chinese interests. The interesting part here is how quickly AI has become another front in the broader U.S.-China strategic competition. Just a few years ago, the major battles were over telecommunications equipment, semiconductors, and advanced manufacturing. Now the fight is over the algorithms and computing infrastructure that could shape everything from intelligence operations to military planning and economic power. And that technology competition connects directly to another major challenge for Washington, the industrial base itself. The U.S. is trying to reduce dependence on China for critical minerals, but the timeline is proving extremely difficult. A federal deadline requires defense contractors to stop purchasing certain minerals and components from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea beginning January 2027. The problem is that the American supply chain is not ready. Rare earth magnets are a good example. In 2025, U.S. demand for these magnets was approximately 48,000 metric tons. Domestic production was only around 300 metric tons. Even with planned growth, U.S. companies expect capacity to reach only about 5,000 metric tons by the end of 2026. This is a reminder that industrial competition is often measured in years and decades, not months. China spent decades building dominance in mineral processing and now controls more than 80% of global rare earth refining capacity. The U.S. government is investing heavily to close that gap. The administration launched Project Vault, a $12 billion effort to stockpile critical minerals, and has directed significant funding toward domestic mining and processing companies. But several major projects remain years away from full production. So the near-term reality is that Washington may need a combination of domestic investment, allied partnerships, and temporary flexibility while the U.S. tries to rebuild parts of a supply chain that moved overseas over decades. Now turning to Taiwan, the island is preparing for a conflict scenario where the key question is not just whether it can fight, but whether it can continue functioning under attack. Taiwan's upcoming Hanquang military exercises from August 5th through 14th will focus heavily on resilience. The island plans to practice moving weapons production lines, activating civilian factories, and maintaining defense manufacturing even if China targets ports, logistics networks, and industrial facilities. This is a major shift in how Taiwan thinks about deterrence. The assumption is that China would not necessarily begin with a massive invasion force moving immediately toward the island. Instead, Beijing could attempt to disrupt Taiwan's ability to respond by targeting the systems that keep the island running. Major General Lu Wenyuan said the exercise will simulate relocating the Armaments Bureau's Tuhun Second Arsenal in Taipei and activating civilian manufacturing capacity for military production. Taiwan will also test its ability to keep maritime supply routes open. The Navy and Coast Guard will conduct exercises focused on protecting critical shipments, maritime security, and emergency operations. The island also plans to deliberately slow mobile internet speeds during the exercise to see how authorities and citizens respond when communications are degraded. That focus on technology resilience comes as Taiwan continues tightening controls over sensitive AI equipment. Prosecutors recently detained a suspect in an investigation involving alleged illegal exports of supermicro AI servers equipped with restricted NVIDIA chips to China. The case is part of a broader effort by Taiwan and the US to prevent advanced computing technology from reaching China through indirect channels. Taiwan has become one of the world's most important technology choke points because it sits at the center of the semiconductor supply chain. The technology battle is also expanding beyond Taiwan. U.S. customs officials reportedly carried out inspections at China-linked factories in Vietnam, examining production records, raw materials, and possible intellectual property violations. The focus is whether companies are using Vietnam as a pathway around trade restrictions. Beyond economics and technology, Beijing is continuing its broader diplomatic effort to expand influence. Chinese President Xi Jinping recently called on overseas Chinese communities to contribute to China's national development and reunification efforts. Beijing has long viewed overseas networks as important sources of economic influence, cultural outreach, and political connection. Xi also hosted Slovak President Peter Pellegrini in Beijing, marking the first visit by a Slovak president to China in 23 years. China continues working to maintain relationships in Europe, while its competition with Washington intensifies. Hong Kong remains one of the clearest examples of the international consequences of Beijing's security policies. Former Democratic Party leader Wu Chi-wai, who served prison time under Hong Kong's national security law, was recently granted permission to remain in Britain for 6 months after initially facing restrictions on his stay. On the military side, Chinese activity around Taiwan continues, but the broader story is persistent pressure rather than a single dramatic escalation. Taiwan reported Chinese aircraft and naval activity around the strait, while the People's Liberation Army continues training focused on readiness in difficult environments. PLA reporting highlighted exercises involving logistics movements, naval operations, aviation training, and drone testing during extreme heat conditions. Those drills are part of China's broader effort to demonstrate that its forces can operate under demanding circumstances. And finally, China also used a humanitarian event to reinforce its regional image. Chinese vessels and helicopters rescued 47 crew members after a Vietnamese ship sank in the South China Sea. Beijing highlighted the rescue operation as an example of maritime cooperation while operating in waters that remain strategically contested. That's all for today. Be good to one another, keep your critical thinking switched on, and remember, powerful people can survive a little scrutiny. Find the Daily Brief at restrictedhandling.substack.com.